Hi everyone, welcome to 8X Pixel Virtual Expo and also to this session of the digital launch of British High Commissioner's Malaysian Nature Tours. Herewith, the session for today, it's called The New Future for Sustainable Land Use, Mechanism and also Nature Protection. Herewith, I would like to introduce the moderator of this session, which is Dr. Kalani T. Nasaritnam. She is the founding member of the Climate Governance Malaysia. Herewith, without any further ado, let me just pass the baton to Dr. Kalani T. Dr. Kalani T, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nora. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Nora just said, my name is Kala Nasaratnam, and I'm Deputy Chair of Climate Governance Malaysia. I shall be introducing Climate Governance Malaysia in a little later, as our first speaker, Mr. Frederick Kugan, has a flight to catch. So without much ado, welcome to Deep Dive 1, the new future for sustainable land use mechanisms and nature protection. I'm very pleased to be joined today with an expert panel who work or have an interest in the Malaysian forestry sector. So with me, we have today Frederick Kugan, Tony Sebastian, Dr. Melvin Gumal, Yang Bahagia Dato Haji Zahari, Dr. Rizza Azmi, and Mr. Kon Onn Sein. We will now start with the first presentation by Mr. Frederick Kugan. Just a quick few words about him. Mr. Kugan graduated from University of Pertanian, Malaysia in 1987 and in 1991 from the New Brunswick University, Canada. He has been with the Sabah Forestry Department since 1987 and had served in various positions. His expertise resulting from years of experience amongst others include forest policy and legislation formulation and development, forest sectoral planning, international and corporate affairs. Mr. Frederick Kugan will talk us through the Sabah structural plan that is helping the government better manage competing land use. Mr. Kugan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalani. I hope my audio is loud and clear. And let me share my screen. But first of all, can everybody see the screen? Is the screen all right? Okay.
Nope, not yet.
Yeah, you can see the screen?
No, we can't, Frederick.
Is it yes. On? Okay, all right. Okay, sorry about that. A bit technical issues that I have to. All right. So basically, given the time slot that has been given to me, what I'll do is that I will share what are the Sabah's perspective with regard to conservation, managing Sabah's forests, and what are the perspective and conservation strategy or approaches that will be taken by the state of Sabah. And I have only two slides to share. Basically, what I would like to share here in this very important session is that as far as Sabah is concerned, I think we are pretty much well covered in terms of forest cover. We still have 65%. This is based on the latest assessment that has been taken together with the Malaysian Space Agency. And of course, based on FAO definition of what constitutes as forest in the total landscape. And if you look at out of this, we have gazetted, protected, legally protected about 3.8 million hectares in the form of forest reserve, parks, wildlife sanctuaries. You can see in the map below, all those shaded, color shaded polygons are actually forest reserves, and yellow are state parks and so forth. And within this landscape, within this protected landscape, which has been legally protected by law, is that we have also categorized additional area, not to say additional, area which is totally protected areas. This comes from various classes, protectors, class 1, 6, and 7, and of course parks, which are totally protected from any forms of consumption or activities, besides other activities that non-consumptive use. And we have pledged, the state has pledged that to reach a target of totally protected areas of 30%, which is equivalent to about 2.2 million hectares. And as of today, we have secured about 1.9 million hectares, which is about 26%. So we have remaining 300,000 hectares of areas to be identified within the whole state landscape. And these 300,000 hectares may come not only from forest reserve, not only from the productive or production forest reserve, but it can also come from the other areas, for example, title land, state land, and so forth. Because if you look at the statistic, we have 65% forest cover. So there are still forested area outside of these protected areas that are crucial maybe for protection. And the conservation approach that we have in the state is that these are pretty much the conservation approaches. And I would like to explain this anti-clockwise, which is what will happen in the state is that even though we have that forest reserve that has been gazetted legally and so forth, but we will be undergoing a series of land use rationalization. What I say that because we will have to look at the whole forested landscape in the whole in the state in totality, and look at where are the best forests that should be protected, because there are some areas that are still a good forest stand within outside that deserve to be protected. And of course, when we look at rationalization land use, if there's any areas to be excised, that has to go through the state legislative assembly. So if there is anything to be excised, it must be replaced. The current policy is that it must be replaced 1-to-1. But we have what we have implemented in the state of Sabah is that we have introduced new concept, looking at no net loss, net gain. If possible, if we can have net gain in terms of the whole exercise, much better. When I say no net loss, net gain could be in many aspects, not only totally in terms of area, but it could be in terms of the productivity, in terms of the importance of the ecosystem and so forth, the quality of the forest and so forth. And we will be looking at statewide forest master plan, statewide FMP, basically looking at how to consolidate all the forest management plan that has been formulated by the long-term license holders, either the production component or even the forest management plan that has been formulated or developed for protected areas. So we're looking at holistically, and then we overlay the effort that has been undertaken in terms of high conservation value forests that has been identified in the state. And this is an ongoing exercise in order to support the land use rationalization with the view of identifying where are the best forests or forest ecosystem or areas that need to be protected. And once, I think one of the eventual aim is that the state will come up with the HCV map. Some may say that is an HCV map 0, whereby that could be used as a basis or guidelines for any development in the state. So any development that touches an SCV should not touch SCV, the best possible. If that happens, then we will look at what are the no net loss, net gain principle. And of course, by doing so, we will be looking at how to expand the scope of totally protected areas, not only covering on areas that are totally protected, for example, class 1. We are looking at other concepts. We will look beyond forest reserve. For example, we are looking at any other areas that are conserved by the community or community by the companies and so forth. That's why we have this CCA, community conserved areas. But then again, this is a new concept. We know out there are quite sizable area that has been identified by community themselves or the community that has been assigned for protection or conservation out from the production component. And but then again, I think we will have to look at to address the issue of its permanence, for example. So we will have to look at how best can this be incorporated and equivalent to TPS category. And if we look at that perspective, I think we can easily achieve the 300,000 hectares in terms by 2.2 million hectares. And having said so much about conservation, land use rationalization, of course, there's certain areas will be excised for community, or maybe certain areas that are adjacent to communities, managed by the communities. I think it is very important that when we talk about conservation of land use, forests, etc., we in Sabah, we combine it with other, for example, other activities. For example, we look at sustainable livelihood community development as an important aspect here. What benefit can this conservation bring to the community, for example? If they identified area of conservation, CCA, for example, I mean, this community must be incentivized. How to protect and manage. But of course, we must build the capacity. We must look at the socio-economic development and so forth. And one other important aspect besides community, social, community livelihood is that we are also mainstreaming conservation in other sectors. Yeah, we are looking at jurisdictional certified sustainable palm oil. I think this is something maybe Dr. Reza will expand on a bit. Why we are entering into that landscape, because I think it is very important that we combine it, not to say combine it, but we have to work together with other sectors in order to make Sabah palm oil in a way sustainable. And for example, Sabah has about 1.7 million hectares of palm oil. It is a very important commodity to Sabah in terms of revenue generation as well. And then it is very important that the state do a bit of its effort in order to secure protect that. And I think one of the issue that has to be addressed is the issue of deforestation. So how do we address that issue of deforestation? We see that the jurisdictional aspect is one way in order to address that. And having said that, not only jurisdiction in terms of other sectors, but then if you look at forestry, maybe Anthony Sebastian will also expand on the certification aspect. And I think we will also be looking at jurisdictional certification of forest management, making the certifying the whole state as one. Yeah. And these are some of the efforts, approaches that we are looking into. But then again, when we talk about conservation, conservation must pace. That's why I think we are exploring into all any options, for example, PES, REDD, and any other conservation finance approaches. And then we have that in place in terms of, for example, carbon has already been enacted within the state enactment as a forest produce. And we are coming up with rules and regulation on how that is to be monitored, implemented, and so forth. Simple thing like registration. And this is very important in terms of to make conservation pace. And then we're looking at the mechanism right now. For example, creating trust, and then how would that trust be implemented, and how can that trust contribute to the conservation to the state in general.
Mr. Kugan, Frederick, I think you're running out of time. Could you kindly just sum up, please?
Yes, in fact, that sums up my presentation. My last slide is actually, if you believe in our struggle, we welcome you. And then we are here for serious discussion with serious people, with serious engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick. I think, Sabah Forest is in good hands from your presentation. Please allow me now to introduce Climate Governance Malaysia, or CGM. CGM is the Malaysian chapter of the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Initiative. We are the second chapter in the world to be recognized by WEF. The 2020 World Economic Forum Global Risk Report highlighted that climate risks and biodiversity loss rank among the top 5 risks for businesses in the next 10 years in terms of likelihood and impact. I don't think I need to say more. Even as I speak, we are losing flora, fauna, and wildlife. We all know that as far as climate is concerned, we are in a state of emergency. Ongoing loss of biodiversity also affects society's ability to mitigate and adapt to the worsening impacts of climate change. To directly tackle the interconnected factors between them, nature-based solutions can play a more central role. Malaysia is in an enviable position of having more than 50% forest cover. Our efforts here will help the global climate crisis, and we should be able to capitalize on this. I'm sure you will hear more about this from our esteemed speakers. What gives us hope is that if we collectively work towards addressing the crisis and limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, we can arrest this trend. As long as we as individuals take responsibility in addressing the challenge in any way possible and advocate for positive initiatives from the government, we will be on the right track. Recent announcements by various countries are encouraging, and we hope the stated goals will be achieved. It is also heartening to hear from Malaysian corporations like Petronas, their aspirations. I'm also a CEO Action Network, and I'm happy to report that over 40 industry captains have come together to adopt best ESG practices. So coming back to the World Economic Forum, they launched the initiative on climate change targeting non-executive directors of boards from the perspective of governance. Decisions made at the board are more effective in steering companies to adopt best practices. Businesses are a significant emitter of carbon emissions, and many companies which are not prepared for the climate emergency may go out of business. CGM is working with the Academy of Sciences Malaysia to provide data to companies on what a 1.5 degree Malaysia will look like, so they can take the necessary mitigation steps to prepare for this eventuality. We can provide the leadership and change we want to see in the world, paraphrasing Mahatma Gandhi. CGM was launched in May 2019 in the presence of Yang Berhormat Yeo Bee Inn and Nick Bridge, the Special Representative for Climate Change UK. We have organized 40 events to date and are currently looking to recruit corporate members to maintain the momentum. In an informal survey of non-executive directors and management teams that we ran in August 2020, there was an overwhelming demand for the type of content which CGM is providing to the business community, including the need for more detailed analysis for boards to make fully informed decisions about business strategy, future allocation of capital, how to smoothly transition from brown businesses, and insights into green opportunities. As a first step towards climate neutrality and resilience, public listed companies should take steps by measuring and disclosing 4 key areas, namely greenhouse gas emissions, water use, energy use, and waste management. We have started with the public listed companies where we are directors, and we hope that soon we can report that others have come on board. Of course, our partners, Bursa and Securities Commission, are on the same page and are supportive of the initiative. With that short introduction, please allow me to continue with the session. The next speaker is Mr. Tony Sebastian, who is the principal of Aonyx Consultancy. He has spent 29 years in the conservation and development field, working across 27 countries in Asia, Oceania, and the Middle East. He specializes in strategic planning for development and sustainability programs. He has spent the last 10 years on forest issues in Asia, particularly in developing approaches for restoring ecosystem functioning in critical landscapes. He is the past national president of the Malaysian Nature Society and past chairman of the International Board of the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC. Mr. Sebastian will be explaining the drivers of deforestation and trends in the last 10 years and sharing new frontiers for protecting indigenous forests. The floor is yours, Tony.
Thank you, Dr. Kala. Morning, everyone. I'm Tony, as introduced. Right, deep dive straight into it. My job is to take 5 steps back here and give what I presume is a very varied audience in front of us today a big picture view of deforestation. I'll begin with a definition. Deforestation is a global trend. It's an increasing global trend. It's a problem. And it is caused by several factors. I wouldn't go into all those factors, but I want to differentiate one of those factors. The biggest driver of deforestation is conversion. Now, conversion by definition is a land use action. It takes what's forest here right now and removes it. It changes the land use from what is standing forest to something else, like a city, a road, a plantation. So that's conversion, and it is recognized as the largest single contributor to deforestation. So what are the drivers of this conversion? There are four main accepted, globally accepted drivers, categories of drivers. Yeah? Urbanization, space for us all to live. Agriculture, space for us to plant our food. Mining, which is clearing land to extract minerals so we can run all the things that we have and build all the things that we need. And the fourth is commodities. And commodities is defined as something that we usually plant, but we don't plant it for our consumption, but we plant it to sell. That's why we call it a commodity. It's trade. Yeah? And the major ones in these are things like rubber, oil palm, acacia for pulp and paper and all this. So these commodities. And bringing it all down towards a Malaysian perspective, commodities is the single biggest driver of conversion in Malaysia and in ASEAN and right across most of the Asia Pacific. So the question one would ask then is, why would the planting or production of commodities affect forests? Well, the reason is that in the Malaysian context, forests have diminished greatly in economic value. Bottom line. Malaysia as a country has had one of the most brilliant and one of the earliest successes in developing a forest industry that was lucrative, that was expansive, and it was great, huge contributor to our GDP. 50 years of that, we are now sitting down, as you will hear from my other colleagues on the panel, are saying, well, not everything has been done all that sustainably. And the economic value of our forests right now is just insufficient that it gets subjected to land use change. We might as well make better use of standing forests, which doesn't produce anything and doesn't benefit us economically, into something that does, like oil palm. So I'm going to leave that there at this point and take it to what we will say, what are the solutions that are in place today to address this? The first, I'm going to look at it from current and an alternative. So the current most prevalent approach, or what you call tactic, towards developing, influencing sustainability in terms of land use is markets. Developing markets in such a way that they influence decisions with regards to conversion is the current strategy. And in some cases, been a very successful strategy. To use layman terms, it is about incentives and threats. When you use a market as a tool, you're either giving an incentive for businesses to do better, countries to do better, or threats. If you don't do better, this is what will happen, or not happen. And this is where you can see these in financial institutions and lending policies, where you build in all kinds of due diligence and systems where you get some sort of assurance that your investments are not going towards deforestation and conversion. You see it in certification schemes, both national and international, which promise you or gives you a means through which you can audit yourself or get audited and say that you're doing well and you are then in the good list, or you're not doing so well and you are in the to be improved list. So certifications also then link to labeling, where you address the consumer directly. Those of us who walk on our shelves, you look at labels and you say, oh, we have choices. We can say this one comes from a deforestation-free area or a system, so I will purchase this product, or this one does not have a label, so I will refrain from it because I don't want to contribute or be part of deforestation. So that's the current approach. And let me just throw one thing at you here. The last 9 months with COVID has placed a very interesting aspect to markets. No one ever imagined that a market could completely shut down in such a short time and so extensively across the board. So the question we would have to think, and a lot of the business people as well as the planners for sustainability should think about is a market shut down like as a result of a pandemic an incentive or a threat? This is a question I think we should all consider, because I think it's a very, very important thing about the current system. It's a reality check on the strengths and weaknesses of our current system using market tools. So let me then end here with going towards an alternative funding mechanism. And this is not something out of my own great cleverness I came up with. Right? This is something that's been around there for quite a bit of time, but never had the traction that it deserves. Just about 2-3 weeks ago, the IMF asked that natural capital be included in accounting for countries. So your natural accounting includes nature-based assets, includes forests. And the IMF had the relationship, or built the relationship with African elephants. And a country that accounts for itself should look at that. I'll bring you 2 very recent Malaysian examples. In Kuching here, when the restriction movement order lifted, there was a 1-kilometer jam outside our national park. And this is about human well-being. Do we have forests where we can actually appreciate that? And how much is that valued? And the second is about water cuts in Malaysia, a tropical country with rainfall like nothing we've ever seen. Should that be part of national accounting? And how does all of this fit into countering drivers for conversion? I'll leave this with you to think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I think that was an interesting insight. And also thank you for the solutions that you've also mentioned. I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of questions from the audience. But let's move on. Our third speaker for this session is Dr. Melvin Gumal. Dr. Melvin heads the Biodiversity Conservation and Research Division at the Sarawak Forestry Corporation. He joined SFC in October this year, and after nearly 18 years as the head of the Wildlife Conservation Society Malaysia. He was the 2014 Whitley Award winner for conservation in Great Ape habitats and for their continued funding from 2017 to 2020. At SFC, he manages teams that carry out conservation, ranging from large mammals to small insects, as well as to marine life. He's also an adjunct professor to Swinburne University of Technology, the Sarawak campus. He has a master's and PhD from the University of Cambridge. With that impressive CV, Dr. Melvin will be sharing with us his research on wildlife and habitats in totally protected areas in Sarawak. Dr. Melvin, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kala. I'll share my screen right now. The other thing too is I will be talking about research, but in a way, in an applied manner, and also how it addresses some of the questions on land use that people like Tony talked about and Fred talked about. Okay, hang on, here we go. Do you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Well, this is what I'm going to be essentially talking on, and I realized that my background to my image, I had flipped it back to front, and sustainable and WWF looks like it's back to front. Anyhow, here we go. So the outline of my presentation is about forestry cooperation and the various time frames used for monitoring and research, themes, and nature-based solutions if there are, okay? This is what the Forestry Corporation does after the 1st of January this year. It is into constitution of new totally protected areas and management of totally protected areas, protection, enhancement, and regeneration of Sarawak's indigenous flora and fauna. They aim to create public awareness of conservation and sustainable living. It's into business development and project planning for conservation-based activities, and as well in terms of the promotion of nature-based and community-based ecotourism, in summary. This is what we have in terms of totally protected areas in Sarawak right now. If you can see my pointer up here, this marine park is over 1 million hectares. This is about 200,000 hectares. Combined, the land area under Sarawak, the terrestrial site for protected areas is over 860,000 hectares. Marine parks are over 1.2 million hectares, and quite a few more are in the pipeline. In terms of the work with regards to research on what we are doing here, we have several guiding principles that we've put into place. We look at data as the currency and the science guiding management decisions. We do have external research where we encourage the idea of applied research with the view that it helps with TPM management and wildlife conservation. There is a committee-led discussion, ethics discussion into what kinds of research we would like to have and we would like to encourage. Less than a week ago, this whole idea of the contribution to science has a very strong standing. In other words, we want to promote contribution to science. We also are linked into the state SORA system, online research and application systems as shown highlighted above. And finally, we have collaborations with the other state agencies, Sarawak Biodiversity, SRDC, Sarawak Research Development Council, and so on. What do I mean by species-based? We have started a priority setting exercise, looking at priority species that we should be looking at in terms of research in our totally protected areas. Some of these include things like orangutans, proboscis monkeys, and so on. We also are starting to look at in the view of exotics and the spread and what it means in terms of losses to native species because of the spread of exotics. Another one, this is now on habitat work. We actually have things, we are developing a 10 to 20 year project with various agencies looking at habitat research, rewilding our protected areas, monitoring of growth of plants and coral in our protected areas. That will be subsequently linked to carbon storage and sequestration and climate change, and also the idea that the approach that what actually happens when we have climate change and its effect on wildlife. Another component that we have is now looking at social science and protected areas. The idea that we need to start developing social baseline of the communities living in and around our protected areas, and also an understanding of the perception of totally protected areas and wildlife conservation requirements. Sadly, this is also what's happening right now, wildlife crime and trends in the threats. We need a better understanding to grapple with wildlife crime. It's prevalent, it's on the web, it's on Facebook, you name it. Then we also need to start looking at what people are importing into the state, and also to do so, having a networking with other governments, for example, places like Singapore, Thailand, where the trade comes through, and Perhilitan as well, and also direct interactions with NGOs that are into wildlife trade, for example, traffic, monitor, and so on. A big issue which keeps on popping up, as earlier indicated by people like Fred as well as by Tony, the idea that there are incursions into protected areas. What do we do with that? We have to start monitoring, and we have started monitoring EIAs, examining land use threats. And what we have done is we collated and built a scientific case to reduce land use and sea use threats to existing and proposed protected areas. It's a language that we have to start showing numbers, going into things even like socio-economic work to highlight the value of protected areas and trying to maintain a level of use that doesn't damage it too terribly, and where we can to maintain a pristine form of it as much as possible. Other things that have popped up, zoonotic diseases. What happens in terms of wildlife and humans at interaction zones? For example, bats in caves, macaques in near housing estates, and so on. Because there are important discussions that have already happened before. Things like in the mid-1990s, flying foxes, Nipah virus building up in domestic pigs and then affecting humans. There's this question of, does it do the same to bearded pigs? What about pigs and swine fever? Does the pigs jump into the bearded form? Canine and feline distemper in cats, where you actually have feral animals, would it also go across into the wild form of it in our protected areas? Do we then start being concerned about domestic cats in totally protected areas, dogs in protected areas, which they should not be in there in the first place? Other things like which has started, for example, that this is a strange thing that has started popping up recently. After COVID, people thought that, yeah, everybody will stay at home. Yeah, they did. Then they started having this whole idea that, oh, I needed to be cool and to have Instagram and all that. So people started collecting and wanting to have exotic pets as part of their Instagram messaging, including plants. And as a consequence, during this time of lockdown, there is a surge in plants being part of people's Instagram, and nurseries now have up to 3 times the load of people wanting to import and have plants inside their homes or Instagram and so on. The net effect, unfortunately, is some of these guys do not look after the plants die, and then they go out and buy some more. So
Dr. Melvin, could you kindly wrap up, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of land use, this is what we are actually doing. We're looking for alternative funds, looking at conservation finance, which will lead to alternative current land use, which will then liberalize funds to actually have conservation activities in terrestrial and the seas. Thank you very much. There we are.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Melvin. And you've touched on areas that are, I think, very close to all our hearts, like, you know, these iconic animals. So I'm sure, again, there'll be lots and lots of questions. So let's keep moving. The next speaker is Dato Haji Zahari bin Ibrahim, who is Deputy Director General of the Forestry Department, Peninsular Malaysia, in charge of policy and planning. He's also the National Project Director for the UNDP GEF-GOM project, improving connectivity in the Central Forest Pine landscape. He's responsible for forest planning and economics, resource management, silviculture, biological conservation, eco-park and state park development, international forestry affairs, as well as forest plantation and protection. Dato Zahari will be presenting the Central Forest Pine Program and the steps being taken to make this a reality. Dato Zahari, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Kalaniti, distinguished panelists. First of all, on behalf of the Forestry Department, Peninsular Malaysia, I would like to extend my appreciation and thanks to the British High Commissioner for your kind invitation to participate in this meaningful webinar in conjunction with 2021 Super Year for Biodiversity and Climate Change. I am confident that through exchange of information and views today, we were able to promote a better understanding and appreciation of the complexity and challenges faced by developing countries like Malaysia in managing our forest resources in a sustainable manner, as well as to tackle issues related to forest biodiversity conservation. I have 4 slides today. I hope all can see my slide.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
The Central Highlands of Peninsular Malaysia are well endowed with large expanses of natural tropical forests and wetland with rich diversity of flora and fauna. Much of this natural heritage has been relatively well protected and maintained. This forest landscape continue to be important refugia for wildlife and provide a myriad of benefits to the nation. It is thus in the interest of Malaysia to ensure that these landscapes are protected and managed sustainably. However, land development, infrastructure provision, and other economic activities in the past have led to environmental problems such as loss of forest cover, forest fragmentation, and degradation of wildlife habitats in some part of our central highlands. They are concerned that this fragmentation and degradation will impact biodiversity and forest resilience in the long run. In this regard, we are addressing this concern through the adoption of the Central Forest Prime Master Plan in Peninsular Malaysia. The CFS programs aim to establish a viable and contiguous or connected conservation area comprising both forest and non-forest area that will be maintained as the green lung of the environmentally sensitive areas network in Peninsular Malaysia. So in the CFS master plan, we have 37 ecological corridors to be established in Peninsular Malaysia. In addition, to secure the water catchment and the healthy functioning of various ecological functions, CFS master plan aim to conserve many of the endangered wildlife. This is called big mammal, Asian elephant, Malayan tigers, Malayan tapis, and Malayan gulls. Principally, the implementation of the CFS is very broad, consists of 4 major elements, not only for the movement of wildlife, it's also considered as a forest protection. SFM also include in the CFS, restoration program, and ecological connectivity. The government of Malaysia has funded this project at about 61.7 million for the period 2011 to 2020. They have 2 period of Malaysian plan. So this CFS project also received international funding from GF through the improving connectivity of Center for Forest Landscape. Then also we have include local funding from Yayasan Hasana and SIAP through TESA to concentrate and focus on toolkit ecosystem erosion project. In order to successful implementation of CFS, the ministry has initiated institutional framework that consists of 3 steering committee. There is a national steering committee implementation, and also they have a technical committee, and also and at the state level, we conduct committee on a state work technical committee. For the achievement of the Central Forest Spine, the Central Forest Spine program has reached a period of almost 10 years in 2011 until now, and we will continue to the next Malaysian plan. During that period, collective efforts among stakeholders involved has been well mobilized to ensure that CFS could be a medium for the management and conservation of our national forest treasures. The first project in the 10 Malaysians mainly focused on Center for Spine 1, Ecological Linkage, Primary Linkage 2, Temenggu Forest Reserve, Royal Belum State Park, located in Great District, Perak, where a 200-meter long viaduct with a height of 8 meters was built. The successful of this project has been recorded and recognition under the Malaysian Book Record that is considered as the longest multiple span composite bridge constructed using ultra high performance concrete. Another achievement under CFS project as showing in the slide. First, this is the most achievement. We can gazettement of 28,132 hectares forested areas as a permanent reserve forest. For me, this is the biggest achievement that we through in this program. Second, establishment and restoration of habitat, 270,000 trees were planted. And the third, this is also the most achievement, all agencies, enforcement agencies, including Perhitan, Wildlife Department, Jabatan Perhutanan, and Tentera, we are intensified various integrated enforcement to ensure our forest is protected and to avoid illegal logging and illegal poaching. And fourth is 14 multiple discipline R&D research with the purpose of input and fact to decision makers, raising public awareness among stakeholders, building and improving capacity building. Next slide. But they have many issues and challenges. In pursuant to the above developments, hence recent scenario and trend indicate that there are a wide range of issues and challenges related to implementation of CFS. This project is one of the first of its kind, a large landscape scale conservation effort that is multifaceted. There is no template or reference point for this project, and so it's a learn as you go type effort as well. As mentioned by one of our panelists, Mr. Sebastian, their main issue is a conversion of natural forests into development areas, habitat fragmentation, and illegal poaching. These massive threats to biodiversity and contribute to challenge in conservation. CFS ecological corridor not only involve permanent reserve forests, but also state land forests and alienated forests. It was recorded from the research, from the study by the agencies that forest cover within the ecological corridor, that means 37 ecological corridors, decreased by 70% for the period 2010 to 2019, whilst open land that is currently undergoing clearing work of vacant land for development, agriculture, and mining purpose increased by 10.4%. Moreover, forestation not only threat to forest conservation, biodiversity and conservation program at the national level, but also contribute to the escalation of human-wildlife conflicts and many roadkill cases as natural pathway of wildlife from one forest area to another has been.
Dato Zahari?
Yeah?
Yes, could you kindly wrap up, please?
Okay, next is the way forward. They have 3 or 4 points here. First, we are reviewing the CFS master plans under the Plan Malaysia. Secondly, we are trying to maintaining and expanding existing permanent reserve forests. Until the end 2019, it was noted that 32% of forest area in the stakeholder is still in the status state land forest and alienated forest. And the third is diversification of funding source for long-term biodiversity and ecosystem conservation of the CFS. And lastly is the strengthening, improving the wildlife pathways. And for the summary, I'm confident that the implementation of CFS initiative will complement and further enhance our existing efforts in forest biodiversity conservation. I'm sure you agree with me in making CFS a reality. There are many barriers in implementing this SCF initiative, some of which I have highlighted earlier. Therefore, I sincerely hope that this webinar will deliberate on these challenges related to CFS. I also wish to appeal to all government agencies, both of federal and state level, research institutions, university, local communities, and NGOs to work together cooperatively to achieve our ultimate goals in the implementation of the CFS initiative. With that, I end my presentation and thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Dato Zahari. I think we are running short of time, so let's move on to our next presenter. It's Dr. Rizza Azmi, who is the founder and director of Wild Asia, a Malaysian-based environmental and social enterprise focused on the conservation of natural areas and biodiversity. Wild Asia works primarily by engaging corporations and economic sectors that have a significant impact on our natural resources. Wild Asia's programs extend across the region and they work with a range of partners, corporations, governments, and local communities. A major focus is to develop new and innovative strategies to work with businesses to promote better natural resource management and equitable benefits for local people. Dr. Rizza will be discussing how to future-proof commodities naturally with lessons learned from oil palm smallholders. Dr. Rizza, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's always good to have wise people with white hair and some people with less.
We can't hear you, Dr. Rizza.
I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Oh,
yes,
sorry.
That's better.
My headset was off. Anyway, no, I think it's very good to have lots of distinguished people here. Some of my seniors, we're all now wearing, I mean, we have our head of white, some with less hair. But I think it was good that Tony started with, you know, what are the drivers for deforestation? And in some ways, I feel that, you know, there is, I mean, about 20% of Malaysian land cover probably sits on some form of commodity today. And if we go back in the past, what we're actually seeing is like these are models of plantation agriculture, which is a product of the way that colonial economics worked. You planted things in faraway lands at a scale where you have access to land. And that wasn't easy when you've got people mixed into it. So where you've got areas of high customary land rights, you would also find that large plantations usually don't work. So Malaysia was ripe for this, where you've got land area where you could end up with sizable areas of land. But I think this really is my point. There's a lot of underlying basis behind why things happen. And when you're focused with things above ground, things that you can actually see, you sometimes miss the point. So I think we've been lucky at Wild Asia that we've not really been stuck in, you know, sort of policy environments. We've been on the ground. Most of our work, most of our people are on the ground. And the other thing that's given us a lot of insights is working directly within the industry, but not just with a single sector of the industry, right away across into the main market areas and also the consumer goods companies. So we offer a slightly different perspective. So often what people say to me is that, you know, oil palm has been around for 100 years, you know, 100 odd years. We are sustainable. But just think, rubber was the main commodity 100 years ago. Where is rubber today? The Kinabatangan is an area which I studied a lot in the sort of 90s. And there are traces there of old tobacco plantations. So in the 1800s, tobacco was the thing. Where is tobacco today? So in order to future-proof any business, you know, here are the sort of three basic things which everyone talks about. I mean, you find this in the literature and stuff. But the license to operate is more pertinent in oil palm because 20 years ago, no one knew about oil palm. The other drivers of deforestation people also forget is 20, 30 years ago, it was the devaluation of tropical rainforest as an economic product. It wasn't strong enough to stand up on its own. So who gained when tropical forests became private land or state land that was up for agriculture development. But in those days, no one really said anything. Today is a whole different ballgame. Why do we have national certification? National certification of a scale in oil palm is a huge undertaking. Why do we get this today is because the business of oil palm is an important revenue, not just for the state, but also for individuals and corporations. And a lot of money is being made from this. But markets are closing their doors. In Japan, it's a little bit easier. You know, they always say, Reza-san, tell me, as long as government says this, that's all we want to accept. The EU is a whole different environment. The US markets are different. So the challenges on to be able to stay in business gets more complex over time. Does Malaysia have a market share of oil palm today? Used to. You know, Indonesia has now already taken the main share in terms of production. In terms of value, it also used to be important as you know, in terms of getting access to the EU markets. But even that's starting to narrow. Latin America has become one of the fastest areas of oil palm production. It's not all about big plantations for them, but you've also got national governments saying that it's an economic advantage to be RSPO certified, not just for individuals, but for the whole country. Now, when you're sitting next door to the EU and the US, that's very strategic. Do we have a low-cost production? Labor is already high. We've got high inputs in terms of fertilizer costs. All of these things are ramping up. And then you've had large fluctuations in terms of oil palm prices. And then there's the other thing of, well, how do you stay above, how do you stay ahead of the game? Because to maintain your certification also costs money. So this idea that actually being able to have your license to operate also becomes a liability and also squeezes your margin down the road. So the smaller producers, they're all struggling. So from our perspective, I think what we've seen is that, well, actually don't spend your time thinking and working with people. I mean, we work with the industry, but actually I think my biggest insights has really been with the farmers without shoes. Those who follow their own instinct and observation. And I think that's really where we've gained the most. So I offer sort of 5 little lessons from this. And one of the first things which I saw was when you do not protect your soils, this is a scene that you would see in every beginning of any plantation, not just oil palm. When you lose your soils, you lose soil fertility. You will also lose money because how do you gain your fertility if people are adding fertilizers into the equation? And then the cost of fertilizer isn't very cheap. Then you go back in time and you realize that every civilization, and we're not talking in terms of hundreds of years, we're talking thousands of years of civilization, collapses when the agriculture is not protecting their soils. The contrast, I mean, probably a lot of people aren't aware about this, but there was a time in the Amazons where it wasn't all jungles and hidden areas, but you had cities with millions of people living in these cities, which was dependent on a very different form of agriculture. Put your kitchen waste back into your farms. And they did this for thousands of years. It was the contact with civilization which wiped them out. So also think about COVID. But these soils in the 1800s were then the sort of new goal for some of the plantation owners which came down from America, because the cane fields exploited what was essentially built by people that no one really knew existed because there was no signs of their existence today. So the other thing which I've also learned along the way is that there were some bright sparks from the UK, and some of these guys were unconventional. Sir Albert Howard is my current hero right now. Cambridge educated, same as Melvin. But he was a guy that he was a scientist. he was sent out to the colonies to go and study, what are the problems of pests in agriculture. But he says, I'm not going to solve these problems sitting in a lab. I'm going to go outside and work and observe with farmers, so-called peasant farmers in India, in China. And he realized that what farmers were doing in the past were always putting their poop back into the soils. All he did was figure out, how do you make this an industrial method so that all farms are able to have this, any size, any scale. And it's interesting, like 100 years ago, there's references to people, of planters in Malaysia who have started to adopt this. There was also municipals who are starting to adopt this. Where is all of that stuff today? Then we talk about science. I think earlier on, the High Commissioner was mentioning this whole thing about where is science in the equation. And I think this is really, for me, the below ground, the things that you can't see things, these interactions between organisms is really the fundamental things that we are missing in most conversations because we can't see it. But in the last 5 or 10 years, you're starting to see more and more papers about this interaction going on between bacteria, fungi, and plants. It's also a fundamental thing about how humans, we gain our immunity because of microbes within our bodies. So when you upset this balance, whether you're in the soil or your body, you will have a consequence. Your immunities will drop, you will be weak, and you will die. And that is kind of takes me to the next thing of, one of my other lessons, which is simply for 10 or 15 years, when I've always brought this idea up of, can agriculture be without chemicals? And, what about these guys doing organic stuff? Everybody said, no, cannot, Reza, cannot. I'm even presented in Wageningen where the head of, biology, this big guy, really important fellow says, you will collapse these systems. No. And
Dr. Rizza?
Correct.
You need to...
you sound like my mother telling me that I've done something, so that's why I just reacted differently then. Okay, yeah, I will wrap up. It's just a few more slides. So anyway, but when you listen to those guys who are closer to the ground, they will tell you they've been doing this for years. There's no collapse here. And what has been really fun is actually trying to understand why did this work? And it's those hidden things. So today we have what we call biointensive agriculture, but it's essentially just stop your disturbances, add more organic matter in your farms, and find ways to bring composted stuff back into your farms. And adding diversity in terms of trees, etc., just makes more sense. And then we are starting to see that, okay, well, people have planted trees in ponds. It's possible. It's not such a weird, ideological, problematic thing, but it makes more money. So we can actually start showing that, well, the conventional farmer actually is struggling. The guys that we have supported to be certified and have started to control their essentially their chemical inputs are also already automatically making money. And then just add any crop already takes you above everybody else. So do farmers want to be here or do farmers want to be here? When you're a big plantation owner, it's very hard to shift to this site, but the smallholders can. So I think one of the exciting things that, after 20 over years, I suddenly now realize almost it's like the lifespan of oil palm, that there is no harm in rethinking how oil palm should be cultivated. It can be a very important land management tool as long as you understand that the whole goal is protect your soils and think about long-term things. So I think, with that, that's probably all I need to say. I did have a video, or the video is still showing.
Dr. Reza, I think we might need to just move on because
no worries.
Yeah, the audience would prefer to have a good Q&A session. So I think, thank you again, Dr. Reza, for that very insightful, especially looking at, what smallholders are doing and going organic and, taking care of your soil. So our final speaker for the session is Mr. Kon Onn Sein, Managing Director of the Foundation for Community Studies and Development. He will be explaining why local community perspectives need to be included in nature protection in order to make the protection programs more resilient. So a few words about Mr. Kon. He's a lawyer by profession and a Chevening scholar, having obtained his MA in Social Development from the University of Sussex. In the year 2000, he was appointed Managing Director of the Foundation for Community Studies and Development. His work focused on poverty alleviation and community development, in particular among the Orang Asli and the urban poor. Since 2015, he has focused on developing a shared prosperity community enterprise in natural farming and empowering the Orang Asli to restore the environment. He also sat in a number of working committees for Suharkam on Orang Asli development. I think with those very few short words, Mr. Kon, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kala. I've enjoyed all those sessions before. Very, very inspiring. Let me begin, and I heard this in an IFAD forum, which I sat in. Climate change is a direct result of a disregard for the indigenous people's culture. And let's have a fun fact. World Bank 2020 report stated that indigenous people worldwide make up 6% of the global population and manage almost a quarter of the world's lands. That means they care for an astonishing 80% of the Earth's biodiversity. However, there's a narrative claiming that the indigenous people are culprits of forest destruction and climate change, that they are anti-development and anti-state. That is actually a very misleading narrative. The indigenous peoples are allies to support the planet. They're not anti-development protesters, but champions of sustainable development. They provide invaluable services that support the planet and protect public goods. And they represent the interest of the people. And that means that we are all actually on the same side to preserve planet Earth and all humanity. They are not villains, but heroes of sustainable development. Let me just bring you through some research studies that show this. Again, this was under the Rainforest Research Alliance. It shows that indigenous peoples achieve conservation results at least equal to those of government-run protected areas, with only a fraction of the budget. And another extensive report done by multiple universities in both Europe and America between 2000 and 2012, community forest management in Nepal led to a 37% relative reduction in deforestation and a 4.3% relative reduction in poverty. So those are nice fun facts to see that. But let me tell you the story of the Orang Asli. That's more closer to my heart and what I'm actually involved in. And I'll tell you why they're the best people to conserve the forest. The Orang Asli have a worldview that the forest is an inseparable part of their lives. They regard the forest as Mother Earth, and Mother Earth gives life. And so they, in turn, have to nurture Mother Earth. Secondly, in this worldview, they don't have an economic theory of scarcity. Or a theory that teaches that there is not enough for everyone. And so we have to compete. And we are basically creating a adage that he who logs the forest first gets to be rich. But for the Orang Asli, there is enough for everyone in the forest. And so they only take what is needed, and instead of competing, they share and they form community. And because of this worldview, they have successfully conserved the forest all these centuries for free. In the village that I work with near Tasik Chini, and this is what they tell me, they have lost the beauty and richness of their watershed areas and clean streams. They were able to drink when they were children from the stream. They could bathe in it. They could even fish in the ponds and catch big fishes. It was a happy and favorite place for families and community to get together and enjoy themselves. and be a community. But today, the hills of the watershed areas have been logged and replanted with oil palm. The neighboring agriculture project has encroached into their watershed areas, dwindled it, and contaminated their water sources. And today, the children have lost the opportunity to experience the richness of this environment. It's a deep loss for the community, as the development plan did not provide for the protection of these watershed areas. It's a sad story of how they have lost a basic right to water and life. And it's equally tragic that they can no longer enjoy the biodiversity of the forest they had nurtured for decades. Development that privileges another small group to make profits that take away the rights of another is cruel, unfair, and damaging to all in the longer term. But that is not the end of the story for this village. Today, through our foundation, we have supported the community to start a community organic farm. We were able to connect them to fair markets, to Jai Grocer, to market their vegetables. And as a result of this fair market linkage, they are now able to earn 3 or 4 times more than their average income of 500 ringgit per month. Glad to say Jakwa, Department of Orang Asli Affairs, have agreed to support this organic farm. And only on a quarter of an acre of land, they can earn 2,000 ringgit. And because of that, they are now empowered to conserve the remaining forest. Hopefully, Jakwa and the state authorities will realize that the Orang Asli are the best people equipped to manage the environment, and will further support them to restore and manage these watershed areas that they have lost. No, let me correct that we have all lost. There's a pressing need to debunk the narrative that the Orang Asli are enemies of the state and recover the truth that the Orang Asli are the best gifted people to be the guardians and stewards of the forest. Research-backed studies have proven indigenous tenured lands often have significantly lower rates of deforestation, making the investment in these communities one of the most cost-effective solutions to conserve rainforests, protect endangered species, and mitigate climate change. Yet, most of this communal land isn't formally recognized by national governments, leading to the threat of large plantations and the conversion of land, as mentioned earlier by our speakers. There's a need, if I may suggest, that states have to recognize the indigenous people are the best people to manage the forests, and that we need to invest in developing and strengthening their local economies. And with such thriving local economies, communities can better withstand the threats to their way of life and the health of their land. And I would like to end with this final conclusion: is protecting the rights of indigenous and local communities and strengthening their communities is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Indigenous people take care of the forest better than anyone in the world, and we all need forests to slow climate change. And I would like to congratulate Sabah state for being one of the leaders that we have begun to adopt some of these community forest-based approaches. And let's hope Sabah will lead the way for the rest of Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kon, and really for staying on time as well. So we've got lots of questions coming in. So if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to start. And the first question goes out to Tony, and it's from Irshad Mubarak. His question is, can an individual or a nature trust purchase agriculture land and reforest? Is this legal?
Thank you. I'm not so sure I'm the right person to answer that question. We have 3 representatives of the government here, 3 regions in Malaysia. But it is an interesting thing. I look at it more from the point of view of what is the purpose of purchasing it, right? If you want to take a piece of land and convert it to something else, convert its use, that is basically the essence of the matter. Because the more use of forested land or agricultural land that goes towards biodiversity conservation and sustainability and interconnectivity and all the other values that we look at bringing together a comprehensive environmental support system for our country has to be good. And a lot of the points that Mr. Kon has talked about getting local lands to contribute to that overall goal. I mean, that has to be the future. We cannot depend on national parks or any sort of government initiative that is focused only on the economic bit and not on the environmental and the social contributions from forests. That's not a complete picture. We need a complete picture for Malaysia. But I'll leave the actual question, answer the right actual question to my colleagues. Thank you.
Would someone else, Dato Zahari, perhaps, would you like to answer that question, give your perspective on it? Can you unmute? Yes, thank you.
Can you repeat the questions?
The question, Dato, is can an individual or a nature trust purchase agricultural land and reforest? Is this legal? Question from Mr. Irshad Mubarak.
This is not a truly a question to answer because we have our rules and regulation and enforcement to ensure that our forest is not encroached by the others, especially the record based on the ecological corridor. They have no case of illegal of the land encroached to our, especially on the ecological corridor under CFS. The main,
Okay, I think we let's move on. Dr. Melvin, this question is from Cindy.
Can I pick up on what was the previous question?
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
The reality is this: if you really want to do it, this is what you do. Approach a government agency. You indicate that you have a piece of land. You say you want to put trees on it. The government agency then looks at the various laws that are in existence. The Parks and Nature Reserves Ordinance has a thing, there's things like Section 28 in the WLPO, which says you can have a conservation area. You can hold it in trust together with the government agency, or you can go up to the Natural Resources Board. There's another term inside there called the conservation area as well. What is legal? Legal is in a sense that you actually have a joint partnership on protecting the land for forestry, if you will, for biodiversity. The duration of time is an important one. People would probably want to look at, if I hold it for forest, I want to keep it for 40 to 60 years. Currently, people are looking at that. Plantation companies are looking at 100 years. Carbon oil and gas companies are looking at 40 to 60 years. So it's a bit of creative imagination to try to get this done. Don't stop yourself thinking that it cannot be done. There are ways to do this, okay?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Melvin. Please stay on. There's a question for you from Ms. Cindy Seagal. Dr. Melvin, I'm intrigued by the elaboration on the post-COVID-19 Instagram post with animals/plants. Is there any relation with zoonotic diseases from such actions? If yes, how so? Thank you.
Now, thing is this, wildlife, do carry things, you know. You have dogs and cats. If you want to import them into Sarawak, you would have to quarantine them. You have to go through public health. There would be a 30-day period. You'd go through the works. Wildlife, if they are F2, they don't go through that quarantine period. A simple thing like recent cases of, if we look at things like sugar gliders, do they carry anything? We had discussions with people in Queensland and then strangely in Florida, and they do. They carry things. Does your Instagrammer influencer take it to the vet to check for all these other things? No, they don't. They just want to look cool and put it on their shoulder. If the animal becomes unwell, your question then is, why did it become unwell? Did it become unwell because it was carrying a disease, or you fed it with the wrong diet? Again, you're just an Instagrammer. You're not looking into the welfare, much like animal welfare people who actually do a lot of research into those animals. Your question then would be, are there, like what you say, are there any relations with zoonotic diseases? Yes, there are. It's a question then is if people pick up and have a look at all the animals that actually pass on during this time period, you'll pick things up. But more often than not, people just quietly bury them in the back corner of their garden and then go out and look and buy another one. So you see, so the sense of reporting is not put forward properly. That's why we are actually wanting to look at this in a major, in a big push, because there is a next question which will come in line. Who is responsible or who is negligent for these animals coming through? Is it the DVSS? Is it people like the Wildlife Department? Is it public health? These are questions which we actually haven't gone and looked at properly. It's not a case of trying to control people having pets. It's a case of who's responsible when COVID came through.
Yep, who's accountable? Dr. Melvin, I'm going to come back to you because there are a couple of other questions, but moving on, there's a question now for Dr. Reza. It has been said that oil palm plantations is unsustainable and there are land that has turned into desert. Is that an accurate fact, either in Malaysia or elsewhere?
I mean, to see oil palm gone to this point where it cannot be planted again in the next cycle, I've not actually seen it. So this idea that oil palm will turn areas into desert, not sure. Is oil palm a high water consumer? Yes. Oil palm in peat, does that have an effect on any available natural forest around it? Possibly. But I think the whole issue with land degradation, especially when you've got a perennial crop, is not something that there's not many people who really understand what is going on below ground. So we do know that there is soil loss. We do know that there's loss of carbon over time, but within that 20 years, there's some buildup and then the cycle begins again. So over time, from forests to 100 years of agriculture, is there a point where the system can't sustain itself? I think we just haven't seen that. But like I said in my talk, we are all looking at 100-year cycles. We're not looking at thousands of years of cycles where, eventually, if you go back to the Fertile Crescent, for example, what happened there was salination. So after many years of agriculture, salt came into the picture and suddenly there was no more agriculture. So what will happen to Malaysian soils is also a big question mark. And it's probably going to be very dependent on where you are, and what terrain and which area, etc.
Thank you, Dr. Reza. Mr. Kon, a question for you. What are your views on whether Orang Asli should continue to maintain their jungle lifestyle, or as you said, organic farming, or should they be encouraged to integrate into society?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. On one hand, they already have a very rich life. I mean, the forest is an abundant source of all that they need. They are already on, a friend of mine would say, in retirement mode. They go and get the animals that they want. It's all inside there. It's a supermarket. It's their pharmacy, the medicines, the herbal plants, their water, clean, pristine drinking water. So it's a beautiful environment, but that's partly true. As you get to know the communities, there are also other challenges. But I think the simple solution answer is this. Many of them do not have a choice. Modernization has already encroached into their forests, destroyed their forests, and they have to adapt, and they have to adapt very, very quickly. They don't have enough, they're now having to compete with each other for the remaining resources. We had one story 2 weeks ago, a young man went to collect decorative rocks for a contractor, and the whole rocks collapsed on him. He's now paralyzed, waist down. is a tragedy. And so how do we help them adapt to this a market economy? They don't have the educational level. Many of them will struggle to get to Form 2. A few will get a Form 5. But with a low SPM certificate, they cannot survive in an urban jungle. And so what do? You have to adapt them to, but recognize that there are very, very enriching economies that can be developed in the forest. And so I would say, they see plantations as a commodity, but I would say the forest has so much potential to develop these economies. And if we can direct and customize it, like what we're doing in organic farming and now fruit trees, there's so many more ecotourism that can generate income for the country and for everyone, and yet conserve the forest.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kon. I have a very long, more a comment than a question from Meena Raman, and I'm going to leave it to any of you to answer it. She says the government should tap much more international funds to protect our forests and biodiversity. I think you all agree. Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, there's a special climate change fund. A lot of these funds can be used for all the ecosystem-based approaches. Other countries in Southeast Asia are ahead of us, like Vietnam and Philippines. The trend now is that it pays to conserve, reforest, and protect. This is the emerging trend, and Malaysia needs to catch up fast, both for carbon and non-carbon benefits, as we also respect the UNDRIP and safeguards for Orang Asli. So this is a question to all. Do you agree?
Can I just add, just as the non-government person in the room, I mean, it's just in terms of, I think for the last, God knows how many years, a lot of focus was on government-to-government funding or funding that is going through government. And I think in some ways, because land is under state, it also becomes complicated how that's articulated. How does that turn into good forest conservation or good land use? Some states are doing better than others. But on the other hand, I think that question from Ershad is actually quite apt in the sense that if you want individuals to act, there are some parts of the laws that still need to be adjusted. The Land Act does not recognize forest on their land unless you're a state, a state enterprise where you.
Yes. All right.
So that's a fundamental issue. The other thing with Orang Asli is it's really good to hear you on that. I see with Orang Aslis in Peninsular Malaysia compared, obviously Sabah and Sarawak is a different ballgame. But for Peninsular Malaysia, the whole continuum exists where you've got communities which are more dependent, have access to forests, and all the way through to those who are sitting outside of Kuala Lumpur and are really struggling because there is no safety net for them. We are lucky in Perak where, this is a hugely exciting community where they're sitting with oil palm, but they're sitting in oil palm because there's no other land left. But what we've realized working with them is they're sitting on X mining area. So no one's told them that actually build up your organic content, your palms will do better. And they are starting to feedback, yeah, we're getting more money now. And, they call us the Orang Jimat, because all our solutions come without any money. We don't have any money to offer them. But anyway, so that's just a
thank you, Dr. Reza. Dr. Melvin and Tony, would you like to, take up that question of Meena Raman's where, she thinks that we need to protect with more funding and also now carbon offset has become a trend. So would you like to just comment?
There are initiatives already in place. There are applications being done for these international funds. For example, tomorrow we are going to be talking about how to ensure that we obtain some of these international funds. It's not just one, it's several. By and large,
but is the process very complicated? That's the question.
Sadly, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, reams of things to put into place. In-kind contribution, they sometimes want 1 to 10. They want to show what the government's contribution is, So it is a bit cumbersome, but it has its utility. It mobilizes extra funds. It has a sense of badging as well. it shows that you are hooked up to the world to try to do things internationally. But yeah, it comes at a cost. Yeah.
Yeah. Tony, do you want to say something? And before I pass on a question to Dato Zahari.
I'll add on to that. These aid development funds their design is to invest in capacity. At the end of the day, it is for the governments and the countries to develop or increase to a certain level of capacity. These funds are not meant to support a program, but unfortunately, a lot of countries use them to support a program. And this is more prevalent in the, I don't like to use the word poorer countries, but in the less developed or less institution developed countries. So Malaysia actually doesn't fit into those countries. And up to a certain point, the fund and the objectives of the fund don't actually fulfill your objectives. You should have the institutions, and in Malaysia, actually, we do have those institutions in place. It is about how we allocate our resources and how we strategize and make things work. I'm not saying these funds will not help us. They can help us, but they need to help us in the right places with the right outcomes.
Yeah.
And it is very easy to get diverted from your right outcomes.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Dato Zahari, the Central Forest Pine Project is, we should congratulate, the country on the initiative. But, how do we ensure that, we have the right buy-in from both the federal and state governments?
Yeah, this is the most important issues to be tackled, because the coordination between the federal and state. So in terms of conservation of biodiversity and wildlife, we don't forget about the economic and income for the state, for their land. That's why one of the major action in the SCFS is to diversify sources income, new income to the state. And we need welcome and agree any of the fund from the outside to create an initiative mechanism to generate income to state in terms of whilst the state is losing their land for any economic activities. That is my comment for until this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Dato Zahari. I think we've got another 7 minutes. So very quickly, there's a question again, I think from Meena Raman to any of the panel members. How do we address the politics of forestry and timber politics with corruption, which does exist? We need to protect the rights to land and recognize that. Who would like to take that very interesting question? Yes, Dato Zahari.
I want to respond to the question. This question, we must look in many angles. Sometimes more of the argument is because of the negative perceptions of the forester and the officers that manage the forest. But our government and department is committed to eradicate the crimes of corruption and things. But now our department is embarked the new certification or ISO in terms of anti-bribery system, ISO. This is one of our commitment to see that our management and our conservation activities are not influenced by the corruption, anything that you have.
That's very good to hear, Dato Zahari. I think thank you very much. It's very heartening to hear that we are really looking at moving away from corruption, because I think that's one of the things that in Malaysia it somehow seems to have been part and parcel of our existence. So anybody else wants to jump in and say a word or two about that, or do you want to move on? Dr. Melvin, I have a question for you. You talked about poaching and COVID, one of the reasons for the spread was pangolins being exported out to Vietnam and then on to China. So how do we, make sure the enforcement in Sarawak or even in Peninsular Malaysia is, strict enough that these poachers, get caught and convicted. And I know some of them are foreigners.
There are several things that one needs to do. There is a need for surveillance. What we're talking about is before the event happens. So you actually have people on the ground, much like what police would call special branch, or in UK, MI5, or all those. We have people on the ground picking up on these pieces of information. The information is then built up, in a sense, to several months. Then in parallel to this, that you would have the people trained, for example, UNODCs in Malaysia, doing training programs on how to ensure that the people doing the enforcement work collect the crime materials properly. What in Malay it's called barang kes, safe storage, good chain of custody. The IP is done properly. The prosecuting officer knows what to do about when they bring it to court, and so on. But there is another issue also coming on. It is the defense lawyers. The defense lawyers the good ones are now being hired for these cases. If you go by way of things like there's a very famous person out in Penang who is a wildlife trader, he who shall not be named. He's not Voldemort, but he who shall not be named.
He's Googleable.
His lawyer is none other than the other he who shall not be named. They are that high up. The thing is, if you don't get your prosecution to be really on the ball, you could lose. And technicality is what you have it. So it's a case of trying to put all the different pieces into place. And it'll take a bit of time, but there's a recognition of what we don't have. If you actually start to have that, then you'll know where you would want to go.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Melvin. Dr. Reza, one final question to you. You talked about biodiversity in small farmers, in smallholders, and you think that's easy. Would you also encourage monoculture plantation, meaning the big boys, to bring back some semblance of biodiversity into their plantations? Would that be a good idea? Because nobody likes monoculture, and with the loss of biodiversity, would this be a great idea?
So those professionals that I say don't listen to are from the big plantations. So I think the problem is the mindset, and the whole industry has been built on a construct of how to plant, and this is far greater than what we could do. So our strategy is very simple. We will demonstrate with whoever will listen. We will start with the smallest because that's who are the easiest to adopt. We have scientific partners who we're also monitoring this progress. But also at the same time, we are talking to some of the estates. So we actually do have trials right now with some of the bigger boys. And everyone is observing. Everything makes sense. What we say makes sense. It's all about logistics. How do you make it easier for decision making and to make some of the access to materials and stuff? So that's the challenge. So I feel that's essentially the main block behind why more people are not doing it. So I think that's probably kind of a space that one should explore, looking at other examples around the world, or what financing is needed to unlock this at that scale.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Reza. I think we just have another minute to go. Any last words from anybody before we conclude? And I think there's also a video to be played. So any last words?
I just have something to add on corruption. I think because it's a prevalent theme, and I do feel that I think the issue of how did public lands, how did that allocate into the private domain? This whole alienation. I think a lot of people don't see is who did land transfer to, and there's lots of parties involved, and you won't have any visibility of this unless you're actually holding the land titles.
Okay.
So this issue of transparency is actually a theme that, you know, kind of has a focus on everything that we do, not just land, wildlife crime, etc.
Okay, Dr. Reza, thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank the speakers and also the audience, I think, who have been very participative for a very informative session. I learned a lot myself, and you also did too. Let's do our bit to help with this planet of ours. We don't have a planet B and yet. And with that, thank you again. And I believe we have a video from our host. Over to you, Alfred.
Thanks, Kala.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalanti. Thank you so much to the other panelists as well. Frederick Kugan, Tony Sebastian, Dr. Melvin Gumal, Dr. Dato Haji Zahari Ibrahim, Dr. Reza Azmi, and also Kon Onn Sein. Herewith, for this session, thank you so much for such engaging and also a very interesting discussion that we have, and also pretty much insightful as well. So herewith, please do stay with us. Our next session that we have in line will be discussing on the blue carbon rising, which is revitalizing conservation and management of coastal wetlands and seascapes for climate and nature resilience. And that is coming up at 2 p.m. Herewith, thank you so much. Before we end this session, how about a wave to all the audience that's been listening for the past 2 hours? Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.